Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're taking a look at Vulcan, an interesting mod consisting of 7 levels in total and featuring a rather intriguing mashup of elements. You may have already noticed that I've been picking up tokens during the course of this opening level, and these are basically collectibles. Get 100 of them, you get a boost of health up to 150, and your armor goes up 50 points also. You'll also notice that there's a fair amount of brutal doom here in Vulcan. It's kind of unmistakable, isn't it? Especially with all the blood and guts caking the floor, ceiling, walls, just everywhere in general. However, not all of the gore effects work entirely as intended. You've got a few enemy types here that don't have the location-based damage that Brutal Doom provided for a lot of standard Doom enemies, so really you're just gonna have to blow them up good and proper if you really do want to splat all their guts absolutely everywhere. Much like the gore, you'll find that the weaponry you've got access to here is quite familiar if you've ever played Brutal Doom, albeit without a lot of the bells and whistles that crept their way into more recent updates of Brutal Doom. There's no dual wielding here, there's no additional monster-specific weapons that you can harvest from downed foes, and in my opinion that leads to a much more focused style of gameplay that seems to work a lot more in Vulcan's favor. The way a lot of the encounters are structured here in Vulcan seems to be in such a way as to constantly keep the player on the back foot, and what I mean by that is there's seldom a situation where you'll be able to waltz into a room and completely obliterate everything in your way, just guns blazing. You'll find that a lot of the melee-based enemies, such as the scientists, will rapidly bear down on you and force you to retreat to a corner that you can stop and pop from behind. And if you do decide to rampage on into a room regardless, you'll find that there's a lot of raised positions and open sightlines where cunningly placed ranged enemies can just riddle you with bullets. It's definitely an aspect of Vulcan that promotes caution over running and gunning. That's not to say running and gunning is never encouraged, however. In some cases, it's practically the only option you'll have, as the other style of encounter you'll find that Vulcan has in ample supply is the Horde Ambush. And what better way to take care of a Horde ambush than with a chain gun, but not just any old chain gun. This chain gun. This is a wonderfully satisfying addition to Vulcan, which I call the Rage Sphere. It gives you access to the Doom 64 chain gun, gives you invincibility, and gives you a wonderful little kill counter in the middle of the screen, dubbed the Rageometer. And once you're done tearing through your enemies, it gives you a nifty little rating too. In that case, we got Brutal. A nice solid rating there, I think. Unfortunately, the Rage Sphere isn't something that you'll find all that frequently across the levels of Vulcan. Maybe they're tucked away a little bit more cunningly in secrets I've yet to discover, but you'll find that they more often than not turn up when you've got a large crowd of enemies to deal with in the first place. The majority of the time, however, you'll find that dealing with hordes is a job best done with either the heaviest weaponry currently in your arsenal or a well-placed chuck of the grenade. But you've got to be very careful over when you do, in fact, choose to throw a grenade, because they're quite in short supply here in Vulcan. They're quite the precious commodity. As for the levels that you'll be fighting your way through here, you'll find that it's very seldom a case of simply going from just point A to point B. In fact, a lot of the layouts here seem to be fairly complex, but thankfully not to such a degree as to become overwhelmingly confusing. I mean, sure, there's usually multiple directions that you can go, some not necessarily the best route to go first, but you always feel like you're making some sort of progress thanks to the addition of those tokens that I mentioned earlier. They're just pretty good incentives for exploration, and even then, they're not the be-all and end-all of what there is to find should you go off the beaten path. This section that I'm flighting up to here, for example, contains a rocket launcher that I can get a little early and then use to my advantage throughout the course of this particular level. It's not obligatory, it's not on the way to what I actually need to get, but it's just a good example of the way these levels are laid out. There is still something to find should you decide not to go the critical path. Speaking of things to find, every now and again Vulcan will just throw you a curveball. This is something that generally happens a little later on in the levels, but all the same, it's a nifty surprise. This section, I just thought the lift was wired wrong until I hit the button again, the music stopped, and it brought me down to here. And this was just very unexpected for me, because you step through, and it's a demonic rendition of Doom E1 M1, also known as Hangar, and it is just eerie when you step in, just because of all the use of textures around here, the dead silence as well, the pool of blood in the middle. But that doesn't really last for too long, because as soon as you head up here and decide to pick up that cunningly placed armor, that's when things kinda just kick off. Demons just start streaming in from the windows, and it's honestly one of the most entertainingly frantic sections of Vulcan. And I feel like the big success of these particular sections, of which there's maybe 2 or 3 max in the entirety of Vulcan so far, is that they're barely signposted at all, so they do genuinely surprise you when they happen. Additionally, these sections in some cases actually help you progress through parts of the level. In later cases, for example, the level section will spit you out past a locked door, for example, that you may not have had any avenue of getting through beforehand. It's a really nifty way of utilizing what may in any other circumstance have just been a diversionary gimmick. Another nifty thing that I ran into during the later parts of Vulcan was the inclusion of these spheres, and I have to admit, at first I was completely, utterly baffled as to what exactly I was supposed to do with the damn thing. I ended up running around for quite a while, trying to find enemies to maybe use it on, thinking it was some kind of weapon considering I was holding it, but as it turns out, it's not a weapon at all. In fact, it's something that you just meant to chuck down a big old hole in order to depower a door. And this confused me because typically usable items tend to be inventory based. They don't tend to be things that force you to put your weapon away and force you to carry them around. So after recovering from that initial brain fart, it turns out that this level wasn't done with regards to orb-based action. No, I'd have to slaughter through adorable baby cacodemons and a myriad of other monsters in order to deliver this orb to its intended destination. And what seems like a neat idea turns out to be pretty goddamn frustrating. And the root cause of this for me is that you couldn't just throw it and bounce it off a few demon faces. That would alleviate so many of my issues with this particular mechanic, because it's basically an escort quest in its current form. I mean, sure, it's not going to explode, demons don't generally attack it, please do not add that, that would make it even worse. And, yeah, you're basically a dead weight while holding this thing. You think you can maybe just run away from the encounters, but no, fuck you, there's more imps to deal with. Basically, the thing that compounds this the most is the fact that Vulcan gets aggressively difficult towards its final few levels. You just feel like it's absolutely relentless by a certain point, and combining that with a dead weight you've got to lug around just isn't really all that fun to me. And like I said, it'd just be alleviated so much more if you could actually plant the thing in several monsters' faces before switching to a weapon. Speaking of the weapons at this stage, I found myself frequently running low on ammo as well, but I can't really speak as to whether that's a flaw with the way the ammo is doled out in the mod itself, or whether I was just being a little too trigger happy. But can you blame me? There's oodles of monsters to deal with here. Of course, you're gonna have to expend a fair few shells doing so. As you can probably imagine, by the time I reached the end of this mod, I was feeling just a tad exhausted. It was an ordeal getting to this point, to say the least, but even then, with all the frustration I'd experienced, all the restarts, the resurrects, the quick saves, the quick loads, I still found this final boss battle right here pretty goddamn fun. So the entire premise behind this is that the company that owns the Vulcan power plant here has managed to accidentally drill directly into hell, as you do, and to finish this fight, we're going to have to close the breach, and that's done by dropping 4 power spheres into the breach itself, all the while battling monsters that come from the sections we'll be opening up through various switches, and battling against the boss monster here, which constantly regenerates. You can take it down, but it will resurrect and bother you all over again with its twin railgun shot. Also, what would a boss level be without an uber weapon to obliterate your foes with? And with that, I introduce you to the flak cannon. It's a wonderful weapon. a wonderful replacement for the BFG. In fact, the flat cannon is probably one of my favorite weapons in Unreal Tournament, so to see a variation of it here makes me rather happy indeed. Not to mention it makes a tremendous mess when you blast enemies with it. I think the only downside to the flat cannon is that it's fairly late into Vulcan when you finally do get your hands on it. If I had this baby in my arsenal by the time I got up to the first big stretch of power core escort missions, I can guarantee they would have felt a lot less frustrating. Intriguingly, this version of Vulcan is listed as Vulcan Episode 1, implying that at some point we may eventually get our hands on Episode 2, but in the meantime, this is still a very solid entry. Despite only having 7 levels, it actually took me a fair chunk of time to get through the majority of Vulcan. In fact, I think I totaled near about 2 hours in my quest to get through this in one piece. And yeah, there's just more to the levels here than I could possibly show you in the space of one video. There's a lot of meat to this, a lot indeed, and if you're planning on giving it a whirl yourself, I would heavily advise the judicious use of quick saves. This is a mod that will put you through the ringer, even on normal difficulty, which I'd equate more with ultra-violence than anything else. Lord help anyone that tries to complete this on volcanic difficulty. Anyway, the link, as usual, is in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.